So I was saying this invitation came about because I kind of, complaining that I hadn't been invited. We were in Madrid, and a friend of mine, Jose Bauermeister, who has spoken here, I think, a few times, and a former fellow was talking about coming, and I was like, oh, wow, that sounds cool. But then I did get an email the next night, I think, from Teo and Bob asking me to come. So then I was like, well, now I really do got to come. But I'm actually honored. I was here. I think it was. Tried to look back over almost 12 years ago. It was a while ago. It was like 10 years ago. That I came and gave a talk, and I feel like it must have been Grand Rounds, but I felt much. It was less imposing than it is now. So I don't know. It was just a poor turnout. But I feel like it wasn't that many people. So I'm going to talk about the work that I've been doing. And it's actually a lot of work I'm presenting is collaborative, which is, I think, the best part of being able to do work in HIV and in this field. And so I'll be sharing the work that I've done with a bunch of folks that a lot of you probably know. And again, the problem, I'm not going to belabor this point because everyone except for our transplant guy in the back is really aware, no offense, of the issue around HIV and the problem of, kind of why we do what we do, why we continue to do what we do, right, is that we have the tools, right? You have all these cool long-actings that are going to be approved. We have microbicides, we've got douches, we've got PrEP, we've got ART, we've got all these great things. But we still see new infections, and we still see, particularly among young MSM, and we, despite what we know how to treat and how to manage HIV and to keep folks from getting HIV, we still have progress to be made to end the epidemic, right? And the way that we think of sort of digital tools is they're just that, they're tools. Right? We continue to talk about the importance of choice, the importance of allowing folks to have choice in how they use prevention and treatment and make decisions. And digital tools are another choice and another tool. They're not meant to supplant or to take over what needs to be in person. They're meant to be a bridge and another tool to help folks engage. Why do I focus on youth? I think, if you look at any place in the care continuum, youth do worse. And this is, there's lots of reasons. And again, there's, huge talks and, people's whole lives figure out kind of why youth do sort of, do what they do, in terms of developmental, changes, in terms of, differences between youth and adults. And, as a mother of now a tween, I've right? I know. Sabine and I had dinner last night, and I've all of a sudden my son is pubertized. It happened. I'm like, what the hell? I got my first all caps "I hate you" text last week from my son. My wife sends them all the time. Right? I was telling Bob I had to get her a cat because I've been traveling so much. I don't know if it worked, but yeah, and it's I don't know where it came from. This just, and it was like, whoa. But and then I said, why did you say that? Do you believe that? And he's like, no, I was just angry. So they don't think, right? And so how do you, talk to someone about taking a medicine to prevent HIV, in somebody who can't plan what's going to happen in the next 15 minutes? And so, again, thinking about how we can use these tools to address this population has some differences from, those that are adult populations. All right. And then technology. Again, I think, those of you that are here, I see phones, although I think, is there a rule you can't be on your phone while you're at this meeting? No. But everyone is very well behaved. I was at Penn recently and everyone was on their phone. So you can let Jose know that you're running a tighter ship. But, we're all young at heart and use technology. And then if you actually look at those that are younger, I think those that row, they're even, more avid, and Morgan, avid users of technology. But if you even go to the younger people, everyone is online, right? And they're using it for lots of different reasons. And if you think about it, our phones are often the closest thing to us than anything else. And again, I won't do a poll, but many of us, it's the last thing we do or touch before we go to bed. Sabina. Sometimes, more than we touch our partners, spouses, friends, lovers, whatever. And it's the first thing we touch when we wake up in the morning. And that may be because it's the alarm, but also we're checking, what did something come in, an email come in, something I need to do, what's my schedule for today? So it's in close proximity to everything we do. We take them to the bathroom. I won't, again, not everyone, but any time we're standing there waiting, we're on our phones. We're doing something. So again, how can we use that, exploit that for good? And I think there's been a lot of work on mHealth and the care continuum, and folks in this room have been instrumental. People have sort of started to address these issues. So we are not the only group that is doing this, and a lot of work has been done, and we've learned a lot. To date, though, we haven't really kind of scaled up. And I think we need to start to think about that as we move forward. So as I kind of talked to you about kind of the work that we're doing, and some of the formative and sort of getting to the place where we're really now getting able to launch sort of larger scale trials, and then sort of thinking to the future of how do we take what we know, what we've learned, and move the field forward. And sort of align it with, I think, where the field is going in other places in terms of implementation, right? In terms of thinking about not just doing individual randomized controlled trials of, an individual behavior, but thinking about other places where we, can intervene to address, HIV, and how do these tools fit into those packages, right? You're doing a big intervention in HPTN and in Africa. And you're going to measure all this stuff. Like, where do the tools fit into that? They should, right? If they're not, they should, because it's part of things that can be integrated. And also, it's a great way to measure things. So how do we think about that? All right. So technology-based modalities, there's lots that we could talk about, lots of different ways to use technology, from kind of the basic SMS, short message service, all the way through kind of, sensors and wearables and patches and ingestibles and, all kinds of things that, you can use. I was even doing a talk with the MTN, and, there's actually like, a technology that you can we call it the vaginal positioning system, the VPS, where you could actually, see, could you actually see where the ring lives inside the vagina? So that's a true sensor. I'm not going to talk about that because I don't design those. But there's all kinds of things that you can do in terms of mHealth and things that I am not aware of, right? I am not an engineer or a computer science person. So there's, advances all the time in terms of these things, and, in terms of using virtual reality and artificial intelligence and natural language processing and a lot of other ways to use technology that, again, is way above my, pay grade and knowledge level. But I think the key thing with any of these technologies is you don't start with the technology. Start with the behavior or the health condition or what you're trying to address and figure out why you even need to use mHealth to address it. Why would mHealth be better, right? Why can't we just, tell people to take your PrEP? Why can't we just do an individual intervention where we say, can you just take your PrEP? Please, just, remind yourself, set an alarm, right? Why is that not enough? Why do we need something in addition to an individual level intervention or group level or community level? Why do we need an mHealth-based tool to address the problem? And if the answer is yes, then proceed on, right? Then what is the tool? What makes the most sense? What are we trying to actually address? And then how does sort of, can it just be a text message, right? Does it need to be a smartphone app? Why, right? Does it need to be, virtual reality? What is it about kind of the behavior that we're needing to address? And that's sort of how you choose your technology. It's not, oh my God, I want to make an app, so I'm going to make an app and then it'll do all this, all right? I think the keys, for thinking about it is that we already know a whole lot now. There's been a whole lot of work done with HIV positive, HIV negative, youth, young adults around kind of what folks want in mHealth-based interventions. And this extends to other diseases as well, right? There's subtle differences, obviously, when you get, around diseases that may not be as stigmatized as HIV still. But they're all sort of basically the same thing, right? they want connections to peers and providers. Okay, and this is what they'll tell you if you ask, right? If you do a focus group, do you want a connection with a peer and provider? Yes, right? So, as we think about moving to the next phase, we probably don't need to do any more focus groups where we literally say, do you want your app to be private? Yes, I promise you they will say yes, right? Again, do you want it to be fun? Yes, they will say yes. Okay. So, do you want your name to be on it, or would you prefer it to be private and confidential? Yes. So now the question is, knowing this, it's, we still could do better at figuring out what exactly are the rewards that are going to motivate, a young person to do an actual behavior, right? Is it a virtual reward? Is it a real world? How long will that reward last to sort of, help their extrinsic motivation until their extrinsic kicks in? What are those things, and how can we learn from other disciplines and other research that's been done, right? What does a connection to a provider look like, right? They don't want to use Epic to go through my chart, just so you know. They don't want it, like, my chart sucks. They hate it. But what does it mean to connect to a provider, right? And on the flip side, do providers want to connect with patients? I'm a provider, it depends. Sometimes, I got an email while I was here, and it's like, what am I going to do? Because again, I get this email, I got to do something. That means I got to contact somebody at the clinic, and because it's outside of my normal, it's an email, so it's not through the chart. So I can't just respond back and CC my nurse to do something. So I got to email my nurse to do something within the chart, and then I got to go back in the chart and make a note that I did something so that it's right. It's kind of a pain in the ass. And it's not that I don't love my patients, but it was a pain in the ass. And I was busy. I was having sushi with Jonathan. I don't have time for this. No, but so again, what does that look like on a larger scale? How many how does that work, right? Do PrEP providers want to know if their PrEP patients aren't being adherent? What are they going to do about it? As an HIV provider, I do want to know, right? Do PrEP providers all want to know if their patients stop taking PrEP? Or what's going to happen? I don't know. Again, I don't know the answer. But I think as we think about sort of what do we need to know now to move the field forward, we need to be thinking a little bit more deeply and thoughtfully about these types of issues. All right. And then the law of attrition, right? So everyone says, these apps, people are not going to use, why would they use them forever? And I'll talk a little bit about that. But the truth is that they don't. Nobody does anything forever. And apps are really easy to delete off your phone. And they're really easy to not use, right? So, you do your in-person, Tea's going to do some, in-person intervention and group intervention. Everyone's going to be there. And you're going to, if they show up, you're going to count, you're going to say they were there, they were paying attention, they got the dose, they got it, right? Now, again, they could be sitting there thinking about, what they're going to buy at the grocery store, or, if their wife is mad at them, or like how they're going to respond to their I hate you text from their kid, and totally not paying attention. But they were there, so you're going to think they absorbed it. If you give somebody an app and they're, using it at home, you can still monitor the same things in terms of what they did. But again, you still don't know if they, if they don't use it, what are you doing to engage them? You can't be like, hey, pay attention, we're in a group intervention, right? If they're at home, you can't kind of go into their house and say, please use our app. So it's easier, right, if you're not in somebody's, face, to just not do what you are supposed to do. So there's some of these sort of things that have been shown to make apps and make mHealth interventions more engaging, all right? Tailoring it to the user. Make the user feel like it's not a computer algorithm talking to them, right? It's like my Delta app, when I was like, hello, Lisa, thank you for being a platinum medallion, right? When I log on, I'm like, oh, they know me, they love me, And so, it's sort of thinking about how it makes you feel like they know what you, something about you, they've tailored it, they've asked you questions, and now they're responsive. Right? So that if I'm somebody newly diagnosed with HIV, I may need different information than if I've had HIV for a long period of time and I'm just struggling because now I've developed, substance use issues, right? The information I need is different. If you tell me what HIV is and what my CD4 is, and I've already told you I know what that is, I'm going to be annoyed and I'm not going to use that app because it's not relevant. All right. Peer support, right? Again, we're still learning how to best do this in communities that we're building from scratch, right? Because people have their own social communities, both sort of virtual and real. And so how do you create new ones for people and then make them want to engage with those? And Sabina and I are on a grant where we're trying to look at some of those. You are. Did you not know that? That's what the grant's about. Cool. Wow. Game-based elements, right? So make things fun. Game-based elements, make something that's not supposed to be fun, right? If I started giving you guys rewards for asking questions here, you'd be like, oh, that was more fun than normal grand rounds. Because you guys don't typically do that, right? So, if we kind of gave you levels, like, I got to just, promote you just in a level, just from being here and being part of something that wasn't supposed to be fun, but we made it fun. And people like that. Self-monitoring, again, having folks track and provide feedback that's realistic and motivational, and what that feedback looks like are still places where we're still learning, right? And then reminders, notifications, things that make sense, right? All right. So I think the key thing when we think about of mHealth is sort of making sure we're collecting and utilizing pair data. Pair data is sort of everything that folks do in an intervention is tracked. It's monitored. Every button they push, every, article they kind of read, maybe, every post they make, yes, right? But how we use that data has really been under sort of utilized to date. We sort of say, my intervention was successful because people logged in 18 times and spent an average of 32 minutes on it. What the F does that mean? Right? You're reporting that in yours, right? You're excited, right? Because how many people, you got a lot of people logged on and, right, it's numbers, and they look good, right? You're happy. You're happy with it, right? What does it mean? Do you have any idea? No, you do not. And that's not just you, right? We don't know. And your intervention, how long do you want people to use it?
Depends on the person.
Right. Depends on the person, depends on what. So he has an intervention for getting folks engaged in care, right? So the question, do you want to use it every day? Should they use it every day? So you have no idea. You're just making stuff up now. You're just making stuff up, right? Yeah. So who knows, right? I mean, what does it mean to use an intervention? If an intervention is meant for having discussion, for community support, maybe more time is better. If an intervention is meant for them to track a behavior, then maybe they don't need to be on it a lot during the day, but they should use it every day. But we should be defining this ahead of time to decide what makes our intervention successful. And we're not, and you're not I'm just picking on you, right? Because I know you, or at least I think I do now. So we have to think about this, so then we can figure out what pieces of our interventions work best for what behaviors and for what populations, right? And then I think we have to define again what is engagement? In an ideal world, how much would they use? How are you tracking it? Are you tracking it in real time? So, if folks aren't using your app, do you do anything about it? And there's no sort of right or wrong answer. It's just decisions that have to be made, right? And how are you defining low versus high engagement? If we're not even sure what we want them to do and how to engage, how do we define high versus low? And then how do we define success, right? And I think this was a quote from this article that I liked, was that engagement with these digital health interventions is the extent, the amount. There is something about time, right? If you don't do it, I'll send you my slides, sweetie. You don't have to take pictures. Are you taking pictures of me? I'll send you pictures too. Don't worry. But there is something about time, duration. There's something about you have to do it, right? But also the subjective experience. So one of the things we learned was in our old health empowerment intervention, which I'll talk about, was when folks sort of went online and were in this community forum, some folks posted a lot and had a lot to say, and I'll show you some of that data. And some folks were, that's kind of creepy. And then some folks probably read things that other people posted, but they didn't post anything, right? So sort of the Facebook posters and lurkers, right? And you know who they are, right? There are people that read your stuff because they comment, like, oh, I saw you were in Brazil, and you're like, oh, you didn't comment on how cute I looked. I wasn't in Brazil. That was probably Teo. But they're lurkers, right? And so what we realized in our interventions, we weren't tracking the lurkers. We were just tracking the posters. And so when it comes time to be able to analyze the impact of a conversation or sort of being exposed to certain material, if you can't track whether somebody read it, right, you can only track if somebody posted, you're missing a whole lot of engagement that may not be, quote, active, but passive engagement that might have an impact. So again, thinking about kind of the whole experience of engagement and how you're measuring it. All right, and remember, it's not the technology that's doing the work. All right, just because you create something, it doesn't magically fix everything. It's how it catalyzes the behavior change in the person. And so again, thinking about how the technology harnesses the behavior change rather than how how you're going to sort of make your behavior change fit your technology. All right, so that's sort of the preemptive to sort of talk about the work that we've been doing. So as Bob mentioned, I'm part of ITech, which is one of the 3 U19s that were funded as part of the Adolescent Trials Network. John is a big part of another one called Scale It Up. And then there's another one out in LA. And the 3 U19s sort of each have a handful of studies that they're running that are meant to address the prevention and care continuum among adolescents in the United States, so a domestic network. This was funded in 2016 for 5 years, and the idea behind each of the U19s or the centers was to have a theme. And so when I wrote this grant, the theme really was around technology. And so all of our studies use technology. And our studies are done throughout the U.S. We have sites throughout the U.S. that we're working with, and you can see they're kind of spread out. Each of our sites is doing typically one or more studies. We have a few that are only doing a couple. And then we have a few of our studies that are more sort of nationwide, sort of fully online. So we're doing 10 studies, and this is we call this the finger diagram. And I think the goal of the study is, and I'll talk about a few of them, is that recognizing that to address the prevention and care continuum for youth, primarily young MSM and young trans women is our focus population, that we needed to address more than just the behavior, right? So, a lot of these interventions address either structural barriers, psychosocial barriers, other things that impact engagement in the prevention and care continuum. And they're all, the goal is for them all to be completed by the end of our 5-year cycle. We'll see how that goes. Knock on wood. But we have 8, actually almost 9 of our planned studies in the field. Should be 9 as of this week. One of our studies is actually a head-to-head comparison of two apps that we've tested in earlier phases. So they both look like they were feasible and acceptable, so they'll be pitted against each other starting this fall. So all of our studies will be in the field. We've enrolled now, I think, over 600 folks in the ITech studies, completed all the formative work, and all of the studies are moving into sort of larger trials. So I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of different aspects of the care continuum. Again, a lot of the sort of, this is information but then within each one, sort of here's some examples of how some of the technology-based tools can address some of these issues. And again, there are other tools out there. There are other folks doing this work, but these are sort of highlighting the work that we've been doing. In terms of testing, again, we know that youth are undiagnosed in terms of all other age groups, and we know that this is, sexual and gender minorities have higher disparities, and that this is not just based on not having enough sort of testing sites, right? There's a lot of other issues that go into even having testing sites that are culturally and developmentally appropriate to provide care to our youth. And again, I was saying earlier, New York is slightly different than the rest of the country. I think you guys have been wholly progressive in terms of addressing the epidemic, and for a lot of reasons. And certainly a lot of the work that you all have done here is contributed to sort of the evidence to push, your politicians and folks to move in that direction. I live in the South, and it sometimes is a different world in terms of access and just messaging in terms of things like this. So I'll cite your friend Jose Bauermeister, who's been here more than me. So one of the interventions in iTech is called Get Connected, and Jose may have talked about this before, but this is an intervention that Jose and his co-PI Rob Stevenson have through iTech, and the idea is sort of twofold. One is, can you do sort of a brief intervention that's tailored on values and preferences of youth to help them identify a testing site, so a venue that would provide them with kind of the test that they would, an HIV test, where they would sort of have the best testing experience. And so they basically sort of get this app, so this web-based sort of intervention, which is very brief, one session, with the idea that it can help them sort of find the right testing place and then set up better testing plans. The thing about the Get Connected that I actually like the best, more than the app itself or more than the web-based intervention itself, is the information that informs the information that's being given to the youth. And it comes from the use of secret shoppers or mystery shoppers that are going out to identified HIV testing sites in the community. And we've done this now in Philly, Atlanta, and Houston, 3 of our cities, and going out and shopping those sites, basically as a youth, right, as themselves, asking for a test, and then filling out a checklist of, the office was judgmental, or the office didn't have, there was a lot of LGBT visibility in there, or I felt pressure by the provider to adopt specific risk reduction strategies. So all of that information is rated by the youth. Then it's kind of, put together, and then that agency is given a score on each of these domains. That information is spit back out to them, and they're offered technical assistance on how to improve if they want. That information is what feeds the app and what feeds kind of the recommendations given to youth. So again, question. Do we take questions during this, or do we wait till the end? Informational and quick. Oh, Sabina?
Do you get pushback from the...
No. No. I mean, Jose can talk more about this, but no. The question, I think, I'm just going to presume, was, the agency's giving you pushback? And no, people have been very receptive. People can opt out, they can opt out, but again, that's probably saying something. It's like, I watch a lot of crime shows, Forensic Files. I know how to kill people, basically, propofol. But if I was going to do it. And they always say lie detectors, the people who don't take them, that's a big dead giveaway. It's even more than what the results of the lie detectors. So that's, same thing. And so again, you can see how, particularly in places where, you think that there are a lot of places you refer folks. We were, I would say, in Philadelphia, the place where most of the group that I work with at CHOP was referring people to get tested, didn't have as great of scores as you would have thought. So, you learn a lot, and then hopefully it's a systems level intervention where you can make improvements. All right, what about, if we sort of take facility-based testing out of it, self-testing, and this has been a strategy, that's been recommended by the WHO. It's being used globally, and with, very good results, I think, in those where it's been used, although uptake has been limited. And I think there's still concerns expressed around, particularly around youth. Are they developmentally ready to receive a positive diagnosis, right? I also sort of flip, are they developmentally ready to receive a negative diagnosis, right? The flip side, what are we doing with that information? And how are we motivating them to make changes based on that? So how can we use technology to sort of bridge the gap, right? And so again, you can use technology to distribute the test through online social media or GPS or apps, which has been done. Smartphone apps where you can order them, which I'll talk about, and then obviously video conferencing is another way. So I'm going to talk about We Prevent. So this is an intervention by Christy Gamerol, who also had some training here, I think, or has come and sat in the back, and Rob Stevenson through iTech. She told me she's only allowed to sit in the back. And so this is an intervention through iTech, which is called We Prevent. And We Prevent is a relationship-based HIV counseling and testing intervention. But I think the key piece here is that they're being these youth are sort of given home test kits and then being walked through the test kit process using teleconferencing, so that they can be kind of instructed on sort of how to interpret the result, how to take the test, and provided with sort of information of what to do next. All right, and this is in the setting of couples, but again, it can be in the setting of a lot of other situations. Links. This is also part of iTech. This is Al Liu and Hyman Scott who've developed this app. This is the Links app is being compared with another app which is doing the sort of the exact same thing through different theoretical mechanisms called My Choices, which is by Ken Mayer and Katie Biello. And the Links app is based on a risk screener, sort of a risk assessment that was developed called SexPro, where youth can kind of look at what their risk for acquiring HIV is based on what they're sort of doing and engaging in, all right? And so the idea is, can you sort of, would this, knowing the score, motivate them to engage more in PrEP? The other pieces that, again, help, they can order HIV test kits through the app, and even in our pilot RCT, we're seeing a lot of uptake of home testing, and actually ordering and returning, which is good. It also is a geofencing, so folks, when they're near a testing site that they have identified, if they've identified that they want to get tested, it'll notify them that they're near that site during that time. So again, using some of the technology that Walmart shoppers do. You know, you say you need something, you're in the aisle, or at Target, it tells you, you're near the aisle, get your toilet paper. So again, ways to, again, facilitate testing. What about PrEP? Again, if you think about kind of 3 different gaps in the PrEP cascade, sort of really between engagement and uptake, between uptake and adherence, and then between kind of short-term adherence, right? That 3 months or 6 months, and persistence. I think there's a lot of ways that technology can bridge these gaps. This was a study from a cohort of youth in Atlanta. And I think the key thing, and this was a really great study, and I just like the figure with the key ring. But the idea that, these youth were part of a study that they were doing, and they sort of all said, here's PrEP. We'll give you PrEP for free. We'll give you labs for free. Here's PrEP. And not everyone still took it. Right? And if you looked at those who seroconverted, 10 of the 14 who seroconverted basically didn't sort of take the PrEP, and the rest, were sort of non-adherent. And when you ask kind of why, it really is around kind of still sort of fear of side effects or low risk perception, whatever that means, right? Or stigma. Those are kind of tends to be the top issues, or there's also concerns about insurance and things like that. So these are sort of things that could be addressed through technology, right? I'm not saying that an app can completely get rid of stigma, because that's insane, right? But there are things that we know that help mitigate stigma in terms of conversations and provision of support and provision of online information. We know that, provision of information around side effects, right, that's easy, right? You can just write an article, right? There's articles there. Or you can have the availability of a counselor who can provide information in a different way. Or you can have videos which talk about it, right? So provision of information in a lot of different ways to reinforce it. And then risk, perception, right? Monitoring tools. Or just having a way to sort of, have youth who may not think they're at risk be able to kind of see what that might look like in a way that, as I think my friend Sarit sort of says, providers, the way we ask and sort of put it on youth, it's a mess. And so youth we don't know what that means. But is there a way to make it more understandable to youth of why? What are the benefits of PrEP to them at that time in that context? Maximizing PrEP adherence. I think this is a study from the former ATN by Sybil Hosek, who basically showed that overall adherence among youth was crappy from the get-go, right? From the get-go, half weren't taking their meds. But by the time you sort of got to 6 months, it was what's worse than crap, shitty. So I went from crappy to shitty. Right? Can you say that here? And then, and part of that probably coincided with sort of spacing out visits, with sort of what the team said. I think part of that just went to youth enrolled in a study, it was fine, and then they didn't feel like doing something after, a couple months. Again, even Fortnite has lost its shine a little bit, which I didn't think it ever could among my, now there's something else. That's, so things, what is, for us, 3 months, is an eternity for a young person. And so again, how do we bridge those moments? And how do we sort of make ourselves available in those moments when youth need us without being in their house every day, right? I don't even want to be with my kids every day. So please invite me back soon. We can't be there all the time, right? But technology can. So what can we do to kind of, help, or at least be aware when things change? So this is our app. So this is P3, which is Prepared, Protected, Empowered. I'll tell you a little bit more about the platform for which it's built for a little later. But P3, again, is a social networking gamification app that we built to help folks adhere to PrEP. And it sort of uses a lot of the things that we talked about in terms of monitoring, feedback, tracking, strategies, information, all the stuff that, sort of goes into it. We've done some pilots which are showing improvements, not only in self-reported adherence, but actually in biological outcomes in terms of adherence using measurement tenofovir and FTC. And we just enrolled our first participant in our RCT as part of iTech yesterday. Go Houston. And to test P3 versus P3, what we call P3 Plus, which is actually having a centralized adherence counselor deliver next step counseling through the app. So we took work done by Revea Miko and others to develop integrated next step counseling and created a text messaging delivery format for it.
Is that based on the reported adherence, not the tenofovir, but just in the self-reported adherence?
It's both. We measured both.
But the feedback is triggered by...
Yes. The feedback is triggered by self-report. Yeah. But the idea is, how do you move closer to doing sort of just-in-time interventions using some of that information? That's part of what we're doing in the sister app of P3 is called Ally Quest, which is for positives. And we're doing a smart, where we're trying to use real-time viral load to step up and step down. Just another part of P3, again, just this reminder system. I think I show this just to say that these are things that are flexible, right? So if an injectable comes along, the app still works. It's not an app that's only built on daily adherence. It's built on whatever you're adhering to, right? Because the strategies are tailored and really is built to sort of be adaptable and flexible. What about persistence in PrEP care? So I think this was a study from Brian Mustanci's cohort, the RADAR cohort, and these were young folks who discontinued PrEP at 6 months. And again, the main reasons were they had trouble getting the doctor's appointment. The other main was that they lost their insurance. So these are sort of surmountable issues, right? And so can telehealth be a bridge, right? In this area. There's a lot of research groups and commercial entities that are doing this. But through iTech, we're doing something called ePrep. This is being run by Aaron Siegler and Leandra Mena. And the focus of ePrep is full PrEP delivery in the rural South. And so we're delivering PrEP through at 3 states, rural North Carolina, rural Georgia, and rural Mississippi. And the idea is, can we kind of, get youth engaged, the folks that aren't necessarily the ones that are accessing PrEP through this portal. Another intervention is part of iTech, U equals U. This is Keith Horvath and Revea Miko. The idea, this is our intervention for positives, but again, really increasing adherence through peer support and maximizing some of these stigma, messaging by sort of community, an online community. This was built off of an intervention that he's being run, I think John is part of, that's being run in New York called Thrive With Me, was the adult web app that we've adapted through iTech to be You Thrive. So again, building off of interventions that have already developed rather than starting from scratch. U equals U through disclosure. So this is intervention. This is not iTech. This is intervention that we're doing at our BAT lab. This is your friend Amanda's intervention, so you can give her a shout out. She's my project coordinator. It's called Tough Talks. So Tough Talks is a modular intervention. So it's delivered in a series. So folks can't just sort of do anything they want. They have to go through activity in a structured way. And the idea is to sort of help youth think about disclosure, not force them to disclose, but to think about whether disclosure is appropriate, makes sense for them, and in a larger scale, sort of how that piece helps them sort of have more self-acceptance and empower them to embrace their status rather than reject it. And it has a lot of different, again, activities that really are meant to empower the youth rather than sort of the typical disclosure interventions, which to date have been more about why you need to tell rather than maybe you don't need to tell, and how does telling give you more support. It culminates, each of the modules culminate in we're calling it less sort of virtual reality and sort of virtual-like, because it's not sort of the goggles and the sort of full immersion, but you're sort of having a role playing with an avatar that actually has a conversation with you, kind of like Siri, but hotter. And helps you think about disclosure. And so the avatars have different personalities. Like there's a dick, like, there's the one that's like totally ignorant, that like you tell them you're positive, and he's like, I'm out of here, did you give this to me? And then there's, ones that are like, informed, and what's your viral load? Are you undetectable? And so there's avatars that are also positive. And so it's sort of a random mix. But the goal is for folks to sort of be able to understand what it might be like, and to plan for that. Technology to foster stigma reduction. Again, this is an intervention. This is the one you're on, Sabina. So this is health empowerment. Health empowerment was was a K-23 that became an R01, which was an intervention for young positive and negative HIV, HIV positive and negative Black MSM in North Carolina. Believe it or not, when I got this K many years ago, I'm older than I look. The main reason I almost didn't get it is because study section was appalled that I would put positives and negatives in the same intervention. So, this was, again, when the study sections even it was separate, right? It was consequences or preventing. And so the idea that like an intervention could work for both groups was insane. And now I think as we've moved to status neutral, it's really, I'm not saying I was the whole, originator of that, but I was before my time. But the idea, right, is that like, to address stigma, everyone has a role, right? And your status does not sort of relegate you to a certain role, and the conversation to be most impactful needs to include everyone. And so that's sort of what health empowerment was. It was sort of creating this online space. And the outcomes were mainly about condomless anal intercourse. At the time, it was pre-PrEP, U equals U, but we did see some reductions in condomless anal intercourse. But to me, the most exciting piece was around what happened online, in terms of we started to see these stigma-based narratives. And colleagues of mine, Kate, give her a shout out, give her a text. Okay, and Jose Bauermeister, again, your person. So they actually wrote an R21 off of health empowerment to start understanding and looking at these stigma-based conversations to try and start contextualizing them and scoring them in some ways and seeing if they actually impacted outcomes. And as they presumed, they did. And so when they actually started looking at sort of the different conversations, most of the posts that happened on health empowerment were stigma related, the majority, 70% or so. And when you actually started to look and sort of code, whether it was challenging stigma or reinforcing stigma or sharing experiences, again, as you would sort of presume, folks that had more, experienced more stigma were less likely to engage in care. Again, that makes sense, right? It wasn't like, oh, that's surprising. But the idea is that these folks were having these conversations. And what if we actually intervened or sort of had some sort of interventions based on these conversations? Could that impact their engagement in care? And so that is this next grant, Health Empowerment 2.0, we call it, or that Sabina is a part of, where we're rebuilding health empowerment because it was built in the 1980s. No, but it was built pre-Facebook and pre sort of the way sort of mobile apps are built for facilitating conversations. But can we start to actually look at what happens when we actually are more have more attention at stigma reduction rather than simply just letting it happen? All right, so where should we be heading? Last pieces. What's next for text? Again, I think that text works. I think that, there's a million studies, a million review articles that show that there's a value in it. Sustainability is, it fades off and it doesn't work for everyone. But if it can be included, just include it. As part of implementation. I don't think it needs to be tested in and of itself. The caveat though is I think we should be more creative about what we're texting and how we're texting. Again, I don't, among even my peer group, which is, I don't know what's saying, but, a lot of our texts have no words. There's a lot of GIFs, a lot of memes, a lot of emojis, sometimes some bitmojis. I have a friend, Christy, who tends to send me memojis. If any of you don't know that, but you can actually make an avatar sort of yourself talk. Hers has a mustache. It kind of looks like John Rendina. But there's a lot of different ways to send information that's more consumable, particularly to youth. And so if we're sending messages like, do your best at taking your antiretroviral therapy really? Can we think about more creative ways to use sort of text? And again, it avoids a lot of concerns around literacy and things. Big data, I am not an expert on big data, but I think that there's a lot more that we could be doing, partnerships we should be thinking about making. We're, trying to kind of work with some of these social media companies to think about doing more online than just ads and paying them to promote our studies. I think, again, youth already are online and using social media. Is it a space where we can engage them more, and then not only engage them to recruit them for studies, but intervene in real time, versus creating our own communities like health empowerment. Obviously, there's ethical considerations, and I think as we move in this field and understand it, we need to have certainly careful attention. Digital phenotyping is another whole field, which I think is very cool and is sort of in its infancy, but your phone can tell a lot about you just by what you're doing with it. So, the way you talk, right? Your tone of voice. It can definitely tell when I'm angry at my house, right? And I'm saying, get down here. Or when I'm so angry that I'm talking like this. It can tell, based on my texts, right? When I'm really happy, I might text, a small amount, because I'm busy, I'm happy, I'm doing other things. When I'm really really, really mad or upset, I might not text at all. And when I'm kind of in that, this fucking colleague pissed me off and did this, I might text a lot because I got to tell everyone what that person did, right? Different patterns based on my emotions. Your phone can tell you that. Your phone can, if you create algorithms, the phone can tell. Again, that might not be useful for me. What's the intervention? It's going to be calm down, you're fine. Don't work with Teo anymore if he keeps doing this. Have you not learned your lesson, right? That's my intervention, right? But if it's somebody who's really depressed, right? Maybe, and you can tell when that they have a certain pattern that when they're about to go into a depression or an alcohol or drug binge or have high risk sex, then can you deliver an intervention? Again, some folks think that's really creepy, but again, is it? We don't know. We need to continue to explore it. It doesn't mean just because one personal study section thinks it's creepy, we don't do it. But there's again a lot of ways that we can think about moving the field from just static interventions to more of these adaptive interventions. We need to be thinking more about implementation, dissemination, as we get sort of better, the tools sort of more honed. This is an idea that I had. This is John. This is the idea I want you to work on. But this, this is sort of sort of an idea that we sort of put together around kind of the end of the epidemic. But we have all these tools. I just told you about all these different tools that can do all these different pieces of the continuum. How do we start to put these tools together in an integrated, status-neutral way? So this is sort of one arm. But again, you can see how some of the tools could be used to just screen folks, right, for initial eligibility in sort of are they eligible for PrEP, right? Some of these tools. And then, they get sort of the option to sort of engage with someone using telehealth to decide if they want to engage in PrEP, right? Maybe they do, right? Then you pair them with one of the apps we have for PrEP adherence. We pair them with a navigator, pair them with other interventions you have out there that make sense, right? Let's say they don't want to be on PrEP, right? Why do we throw them away, right? Let's enroll them in our virtual cohort, our stigma reduction intervention. Enroll them in health empowerment. Keep sending them HIV test kits. Engage with them, right? And then if they want to start PrEP or they become positive, we roll them into something else. So we're not losing them. So that's health empowerment. And then telehealth isn't forever, right? You might not want to do that forever. They need an in-person. Use things like Get Connected to actually get them to a care provider that's culturally and developmentally competent before you sign off on them, just because the study ends. So again, this is just one way, just for us, I think, as we're, starting to think about is how do we start to give folks choice, be responsive, right? An app is not going to work for everyone. Not every, so how do you then, have somebody on an app where they can then stop using the app and maybe get an in-person intervention, right? How do we start to think about what these interventions look like? Again, I think building on rather than anew. As I said, P3 I talked to you about, which is our PrEP adherence intervention. It all comes from our common platform, which is called Charge, which is around comprehensive health. Out of Charge, the idea is that when people log in, they get asked questions that tailor them to whether they need a PrEP app or an ART app. And then off of those, we have customizations with collaborators in South Africa that we're working with, trying to get some funding there. We've done some pilot work, and it's found to be highly feasible and acceptable. In Vietnam, Thailand, we have a R21 we're adapting. And then we've worked, again, Christy Guillermo and I have put in a grant to include smoking cessation, building on behaviors rather than creating new apps. So I think final thoughts is I think we should just not be reinventing the wheel. Again, a lot of folks have done this work in a lot of different diseases. There's things we know. There's things can be kind of recycled. Even if it's not the exact same code, it's very easy. If a developer knows what they're building and they have something to look at, they can build a messaging portal, or they can, use code that's out there, right? We don't have to, a lot of these things don't have to be sort of redone from scratch. Thinking about even dashboards, how do we sort of monitor? Doesn't have to be redeveloped. And then, how do we sort of start to create toolkits where we can actually rapidly adapt some of the tools that are working in a way that we don't have to do 8 million focus groups and 8 million ideas and all this, right? What is the key information that we need to make this app work in the population? Believe it or not, we gave, in South Africa, we gave them AllyQuest in English, and they loved it, right? They were like, we love all of this, right? And there was pieces of it that we, just in the pilot testing was initially they loved. It doesn't mean that there's not pieces we need to change and address specific to that context, but I think we can learn even, before we adapt, as to, what's the critical pieces, right? What are the critical things that need to be done? And then a grant that I'm working on is a content repository. So every time you create a new app, researchers don't have to write the material over and over and over again. How do we take all of this information that's already been developed and create a system that researchers can use and reuse and re-update, based on, and so that we stop having to use our little grant money to write content or update, it's better to update the content than to start from scratch. And so I'm hoping to get that STTR in September to create that, so that we can, again, I think, make the most of the resources that we have so far. So I think that's all I have. I think, again, we've learned a lot. There's a lot of still places for us to do better, to make use of the tools, to build on the work we're all doing, and to really kind of address the gaps that exist in the prevention and care continuum. So thank you.
Great, as expected. I'm glad we talked in Madrid.
That was great.
Thank you.
Appreciate the humor too. It's so early in the morning. Okay, I have two related questions.
Sure.
The first has to do with development and the huge age range when we say 13 to 24 and all of this work. And so I'm the mother of 3. They're now all men, so it's hard for me to say that. 17 to 25. But huge difference between 13 to say 15, 16. They say I hate you way more than I like to say. And then 17 and up. And I think the data that are out there is that it's more on the older end. But I raise that because of some of those real developmental needs that you alluded to, and brain development. And many people in this room have heard me tell the story of my 16-year-old he's now 22, but wants to be an actor, and Accutane. Highly motivated to get rid of the acne that he had. But unless I was standing or my husband was standing at the door with a pill and a glass of water in the morning, he couldn't get his act together to get that pill in his mouth. It's not that he didn't want to. That's
Right.
one kid as opposed to the one who's now 17 who's very OCD about it. So there are those differences. So I'm just a little bit curious about this. And then related, the perinatally infected youth that I follow, who are now all in their 20s, talk a lot about social isolation and wanting relationships with providers for their families. And I'm just wondering, in a lot of the app use, are there ways how you address that? So I realize the peer stuff is there, but sometimes they're wanting real connections to the systems they're in, and how you're thinking about that.
No, that's great. I mean, I think, so to be clear, most of our interventions end up being for 16 and up, right? And when you actually look at the M Health world around HIV, there's less around in work among those sort of 13 to 15 or 16, and that is probably still where that we still have some holes. And I think a lot of it has to also do with sort of access to technology, whether sort of I can when my son, I mean, the reason I know why I got the Hate You is because actually I was in Philadelphia and I turned off his internet from Philadelphia.
That's what we got.
So I know why I got it. But through an app that I have on my phone called The Circle, where I can monitor everything, right? Everything that they're doing. And so I have that, but when they're 18, right, I might not be able to, right, especially if I'm not paying this bill. Or if I am paying the bill, it still takes a longer to stop paying the bill than immediately hit. Like sometimes I do it just for fun at home, just to see how quickly they all run downstairs and see who's the fastest. It's fun. So I think that there are definitely issues, right? And I think that is in terms of developmental pieces, in terms of literacy, in terms of kind of creating action plans and sort of how the app is going to make the behavior change. I think that's where the behavior change intervention has to lead the technology. So, I think it's where thinking about what is the intervention for that 13-year-old? And then is technology the right place to do it? And if so, how? Versus, okay, we have this app, and so just because, we can go to 16, so we'll go to 13. And so I would say that, again, even though, the ATN is for, 13 and up, most of our interventions are 16 or 15 at the very youngest. I don't think John is that. In terms of the other piece in perinatal, I think, you can, a portal is just a portal, or a forum is just a forum, right? So, you can kind of create the groups, and again, whether it's through an app or even sort of WhatsApp, right? You can create, although be careful of privacy. You can create connections to whatever sort of makes the most sense. I think anytime you're creating the connections to providers, I still do think we don't have enough information about what actually providers say they're willing, but are they really, and what does that look like? And so that flip side, right? Yeah. I mean, just look at me. Like, it does. It annoys me a little bit. If I got like 400 texts from patients, it would be hard, right? Because I'm also sending like weird gifts of like, Dolly Parton to friends. And like, what if I send one to a patient? Like, how does that work? I love Dolly Parton. She's clothed, but they're weird. Or cats, a lot of cat gifts in my group. And so, again, how do you manage that? How do you make it so that, what's for the provider? And then support. We have done some work. I'm working with a postdoc at Duke, who is also kind of trying to use apps to engage youth, to young perinatals, to engage a person in their social network, to be part of that app. And so they would get kind of a companion app that would allow connection, but then have slightly different information. So a lot of different ways to engage different social support people.
I had a question just about sustainability and scaling up. So you kind of talked about it at the end with the repository that you're creating. And I'm just curious, like, so when the money runs out, for example, on this grant, like, what happens to these apps and where do they live? how, and I'm imagining it's like there's servers that need to support it, but also for the ones that like social support, like where's the staff?
Right. I mean, I think that's a great question.
It doesn't apply to San Health, I think, but.
No, I mean, I think you're right. I mean, but it applies to all the work we're doing, right? What happens, like, when our money runs out from our grants? I think part of it depends on how successful it is, right? And how good we are about thinking about that ahead of time. But I think it also is going to require new partnerships moving forward, and thinking about that ahead of time and being willing to hopefully kind of get the funders to kind of see that. I mean, part of what we've been doing is going down small business grant paths, specifically because they actually prioritize commercialization. And commercialization doesn't have to look like the patient or the person, is paying for the app or paying for the technology. It can have different sort of other models. But it's a question that I think we're just now getting to. So I don't have the full answers about how to do it. I can tell you that in 3 weeks, we're going to our company, Ayogo, who's in Vancouver, to specifically start to have these conversations. What pieces do we own? What pieces do they own of the app? And how do we continue to use it, right? If it were to become available, what's in it for them? And I think that's the conversations to start having if you have partners. What is in it for the technology partner? So for them, the money that I've spent to make a lot of these, we've created some of the features, all of those strategies that people can pick, the medication tracker, some of the, that's content, that's intellectual stuff we've created. They might want to use that again for, their, we have it in the contract, but just owning it and then making the best use of the fact that we own it is a different thing.
Well, I mean, it's great that you can have this conversation because I'm in an SBIR and it's really ugly.
Yeah, I heard about that last night, you said.
Yes. So
I'm easier to work with than you, but.
well, I don't know about that. I'm not the problem.
See?
This is breathlessly amazing.
Thank you.
I was just wondering a very primitive question. When you say who are the disciplines that you feel are essential to doing this work? Because you've alluded to behavioral science and obviously medical specialties and engineering and developers. And so I'm just wondering, when you're sitting in a center that's mainly behavioral scientists and public health folks.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends what you're trying to create, and then, you have to figure out kind of who you need on your team to do it. And certainly for instance, in our Tough Talks, which is our kind of AI, artificial intelligence, in addition to just developers and graphics folks, we needed folks who understood natural language, and which is a different machine learning, which is a different field than just somebody who's an app developer. So, kind of it depends on that technology. I think there's also choices of sort of when you're deciding if you're going to build something, who you're going to work with. So one of our initial interventions we built, quote, in-house. We had an academic partner who was in our university, and that had benefits in that it was probably cheaper in the beginning. And they understood research and, research grants, and that, sometimes you have to do things even though you don't have the money. I don't work 5% on iTech, even though that's what I get paid for, right? So you just do, you do what you do to get the work done. Downsides was they weren't as savvy, they weren't as up to speed, they, weren't fast because they had other things they were working on. Whereas technology developers may already have engineers, computer scientists, graphics folk, project management folk, right? Because that's their for profit. And so they may already have all of everything you need versus, you having to put it together. No, sorry.
So could you talk a little bit about how HIPAA compliance works into all these chat rooms and text messaging and just app development in general? All our providers around the state are always asking us, this is great, but why not everybody's ever going to sign off on it?
Yeah, I mean, so HIPAA compliant, I think, is what the fuck is that? I mean, it's right? It's the apps are HIPAA compliant, right? In that, as best as we can, we protect your privacy on an app, recognizing that like everything can be stolen. So, none of our data is really safe. Let's be like, realistically, right? So, the apps themselves are sort of built on sort of levels of encryption that like somebody can't just sort of, the information is quote protected, right? Because they're putting in information that is PHI in some way, right? An email address. Now, in our apps, we all sort of we do the most things we do are to protect privacy is in providing really good informed consent about what we can and can't protect, which is I think true with all the work we're doing, right? Even with phone calls, when we remind patients to come in for clinic and they say we can leave a message on their answering machine, right? I think again, so we have logins, we have automatic timeouts, right? In terms of sort of on forums, all of our stuff ends up being moderated, right? So we have folks that are looking, and we have community guidelines around, what to say and what not to say. Don't just give your birth date and your name, right? Don't upload a picture of your penis. It's fine to do on another app. We're not judging. Just don't do it on this one. That's not the purpose. And we can remove stuff. I can tell you that in Health Empowerment, our first version of Health Empowerment, of the 1,500 posts and conversations and things that media that was uploaded and said, we took down one line of one post, and it was really because it was a little over the top in terms of homonegativity and religion that we thought could impact sort of someone on the site in a way that we didn't want and intend. So, but nothing concerning. So I think I think so. Those are the types of things that we do. We keep them on server, and the information we is in terms of the app developers have sort of access to, obviously, if they're going to have access to information, they also kind of have to be IRB on our IRBs and things like that.
Thank you. Great talk. In terms of dissemination, you need people to use the app.
Yeah.
I was wondering what your thoughts are about that, and I was also wondering whether from other apps people are building theories about app use.
Yes, and yes. I think that the question is sort of how to get them out in the dissemination. Again, in an ideal world, like we would find that P3 is like it works for adherence, and Bill Gates is like, here's $1 million, just put it on the App Store and let people use it, right? That's where people get apps, right? And it's on it's in the App Store already, right? So, I think the channels folks could get it is sort of the same way people get apps, right, all the time. The question is sort of how do you sort of drive interest of like people going there. You go to download an app on the App Store because you're looking for something. I'm bored. I want to play a game, or I heard about a game. I'm going to download that. I need to manage my money better because I'm spending too much money shopping or buying new bikes or whatever you buy. I want to download a money app, right? The features you want. You know what you're looking for. The young people don't know they need an app to help them with their prep, right? So how do you sort of, again, drive up demand, which is part of it. And I think that's part of the larger scale dissemination and how we have to think about it. We haven't gotten to there yet because we haven't yet fully proved efficacy of anything. Maybe we don't need to. Theories of kind of engagement. I think there's a lot, right? I think the first piece is that there's been a lot of work that theory should inform your intervention to begin with. And again, does it matter what theory? Probably for the behavior, but not necessarily. It doesn't change when it's an mHealth intervention. It's, right? So the theory should inform it. And then there are definitely pieces that we know impact engagement that sort of go into it. And, I think what we're learning now is more, right, is trying to be more sophisticated about what users interact with which components of different technologies and how do we kind of maximize that when we need it.
Thank you. This is awesome. I just have a question. When you were talking about some of the privacy issues particularly the fact that the apps are available in the App Store, how does, I mean, I know you have the timeout and the login, but like if a partner or a parent is on someone's phone and it's like, oh, here's this P3 app, I'm gonna go Google what this is, like, how does that, because again, like some 16-year-olds not hold the phone with their phone. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an issue we face. So we try and, it's a balance. So initially we had the apps where you could get them through other places, right? And all of the apps that, if you look at all of them, none of them like make it seem like HIV related, right? So at first glance on somebody's phone, you would see the P3, you wouldn't notice. You'd have to actually make an effort. When you actually have apps that aren't through the App Store, it's much harder for folks to actually even onboard, and even in studies, because you have to sort of go through procedures, and if there's updates, it's really challenging. And so, we sort of have to weigh the cost of, of each. But we had in one of our pilot studies, one of our kids was on our Links app, and their parents saw, an app, and they Googled links, and it ended up, somehow they, figured out, right, through Googling, because you can figure out that it was an HIV, a testing study, and they were upset, and they were upset not because they, were upset that they were actually doing, they were upset they hadn't told them that they were hurt that they hadn't told them that they wanted to engage in HIV's testing study. So that was a good outcome in that, with that parent, but it was a social harm nonetheless. And so I think it's just being quite aware. I think really that is why informed consent in these types of studies is really important, and folks know and understand, what we can and can't do. Those same youth, they'll also have Grindr. So, so I think, again, you also have to weigh the, weigh what we're doing with also what they're already doing in their real lives. So
that was amazing. We can go on and on, but we have to stop.
Cool.
I know you'll be meeting with fellows and people, so thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you.